one other item is gambling winnings. Income tax is automatically withheld from certain types of gambling winnings. 25% of the proceeds paid are withheld from gambling winnings of more than $5,000 from sweepstakes, wagering, or lotteries. Now, winnings that are not paid in cash, such as a car or a trip, are taken into account at their fair market value. So be prepared. That's income, and the winner is going to have to pay tax on it. Gambling winnings from bingo, keno, and slot machines generally are not subject to income tax withholding. However, the income should be reported, and you may have to pay tax on it unless losses exceed winnings. If the amount of the income from the winnings is significant, it will be reported to the taxpayer on Form W-2G from a gambling establishment. By the way, if somebody is involved in gambling, he or she may very well be able to take a deduction on Schedule A for the amount that he or she lost up to the amount of the winnings. We'll talk more about that in the next module when we discuss itemizing and Schedule A. In wrapping up the discussion on income, there are other types of income that you may need to account for on the tax return. One of those is what is referred to as not-for-profit activities, such as hobbies. In the case of a hobby, your client likely does it for fun and not to make a profit. Usually, these activities will cost more than they make. However, occasionally someone may pay your client for the results of his hobby. Since hobby income is not one of the income sources specifically exempted from tax, it is listed on the front of Form 1040 under Other Income. Of course, there were probably expenses related to this other income. These may possibly be deducted later in the return calculation if you itemize expenses for the client. We'll mention more about this when we get to Schedule A. A business can become a hobby, and a hobby can become a business. Therefore, if Emily decided she wants to restore cars for a living, you should treat it as a business and prepare a Schedule C for her. On a Schedule C, she can deduct all of her expenses and even report a loss if it applies. However, if she makes a profit, we will be reporting the profit and she will have to pay self-employment tax on it. On the other hand, if the business has had a loss in 3 of the last 5 years, the IRS may deem the business as a hobby and send Emily a letter stating that she needs to reclassify the business as a hobby. Somewhat similar to hobby income is that of personal property rental. Let's imagine that your client has a boat and one of his neighbors asks to borrow it over the weekend. He agrees and rents him personal property for which the neighbor pays your client $200. If your client had expenses as a result of renting the boat, they can be adjusted against the rent on the front of the 1040 in other deductions. So, if the neighbor forgot to refill the gas tank and it cost your client $50 to do so, you will report the $200 under other income and $50 as an adjustment to his gross income. If your client serves on a jury during the year, he will receive jury duty pay. This again is taxable and reported as other income. One common form of business income among taxpayers is called bartering. Bartering is trade. Instead of using money, the parties are trading products and or services. The income is taxable just as if it were cash. For instance, I might tell Jeff, a client, I will do your tax return if you paint my living room. What happens then on my tax return and Jeff's tax return? The value of the labor is calculated as income on both returns. For instance, if it would have cost $600 to have someone paint my living room, then I must include the $600 as business income on my tax return. Likewise, if the cost of preparing the tax return for Jeff would have been $250, then Jeff will report business income of $250. Now, canceled debts are another form of income. For instance, if your client had a small mortgage and declared bankruptcy, and the bank cancels the debt rather than go through the cost of foreclosure, the bank will issue a 1099-C, and you will need to show the cancellation as income on your client's return. On the other hand, if your client had an $8,000 mortgage with a family member, and they realized that your client was in dire straits and canceled the debt, they may simply wish to call it a gift. So there would be no income to report, because gifts up to a certain dollar amount are not reportable. This same principle is true of all recoveries of items that you previously deducted. they should be included as income in the year of recovery. Now, what are we talking about here? Well, maybe your client Mary had a bad debt. She loaned a corporation $2,000 and this corporation filed bankruptcy with no assets against which she could file suit. As we pointed out, there's a provision allowing Mary to take this loss on a Schedule D. So last year she did just that, and her taxable income was lower than it would have otherwise been. Surprisingly, this year, an officer in the corporation paid the $2,000 debt to Mary along with the note of apology. Mary will report the $2,000 as income this year. How important was the note of apology in preparing her taxes? It wasn't, but it was a nice gesture. How about medical expense reimbursement for a claim filed in a previous year? As we'll discuss later, medical expenses are deductible. Let's imagine that Joe taxpayer had a very large medical bill last year, paid it, and properly took the deduction for the medical expense. In this tax year, Joe received reimbursement from the insurance company, and he didn't have medical expenses this year to offset it. He must include the excess over whatever is deductible as income in the year received.